It all started 2 weeks ago. I had been feeling restless for days, unable to sleep properly. I had no reason to believe anything was wrong, but every single night I would wake up at exactly 2:43 a.m. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, a one-off. But when it happened the second night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something strange was going on. The first night it happened, I woke up to complete silence. I had no idea why I was awake. My room was dark, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I turned to check the clock on my nightstand, and it was exactly 2:43 a.m. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just one of those things, but still, the unease lingered in the back of my mind. The next night I woke up again at 2:43 a.m. This time, there was a faint sound coming from outside my window, almost like scratching or a soft scraping noise. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal, like a raccoon, roaming around in the yard. But the sound was too precise, too rhythmic to be natural. It was almost as if someone was deliberately dragging something along the ground, just outside my window. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overreacting. I pulled the blankets tighter around me and rolled over, trying to fall back to sleep. But the scraping sound kept going. Each time it seemed to get closer, as though the thing, whatever it was moving closer to my window. That night, I didn't sleep. The scraping continued, and my mind kept racing. It felt like something was lurking outside, waiting. But when the morning light finally came, I told myself it was just my imagination. The third night was when things got real. Again, at 2:43 a.m., I woke up. But this time, there was no scraping. Instead, there was a strange stillness, an almost oppressive silence. It was as if the entire world outside had come to a halt. My room was pitch dark. No light from the street outside, no sounds from the neighborhood. Just silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay still, my eyes wide open, straining to listen for any noise. And then I heard it, a faint sound, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. Soft at first, but unmistakable. The footsteps seemed to come from outside, just beneath my window. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, but I couldn't move. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a neighbor walking down the street. But there was something about the sound that felt different. It felt intentional, like someone was deliberately moving closer to my house. I mustered the courage to look out the window. At first, all I saw was darkness, nothing but the faint outline of trees in the distance. I waited, and then I saw it. A figure, dark, indistinct, standing at the edge of my yard. I couldn't make out any details at first, just a silhouette against the blackness, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized something horrifying. The figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing my window. It wasn't like a person was casually standing there. It felt wrong, like something was watching me, waiting. The longer I looked, the more I felt like it could see me. And then, without warning, my phone buzzed. The sudden noise made me flinch, and when I looked back at the window, the figure was gone. I rushed to the door, opened it, and checked the yard. There was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything. I even called out, thinking it might have been a neighbor. Nothing. I shut the door, locked it, and stood there in the middle of my room, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't. That night, I barely slept. The feeling of being watched lingered, and every small sound made me jump. The next morning, I checked my window. There were no signs of anyone being there. No footprints, no disturbances. I even went outside, checked around the house, but it was as if nothing had happened. Still, I knew what I had seen. And that was just the beginning. The following night, I was determined not to let my fear control me. I thought maybe if I stayed awake, I could catch whoever or whatever was out there. I didn't know if I was dealing with a person or some strange phenomenon, but I needed to know. So, I stayed up, sitting at the edge of my bed, keeping my eyes locked on the window. It was an uncomfortable night. The air was thick, the kind of stillness that fills a room with an eerie quiet. I checked the clock, 2:43 p.m. My heart started to race. I hadn't even heard the scraping sound, but I could feel it in the air. Something was coming. I watched the window intently, the blackness outside seemingly moving, breathing in rhythm with my own anxious breaths. Then, at that exact moment, I heard it. The sound was soft at first, almost like a whisper in the wind. But then it became clearer. The unmistakable sound of something dragging across the ground. Slowly, almost methodically, it scraped along the pavement outside. My stomach dropped. I knew this wasn't some stray animal or an environmental noise. This was something deliberate. I crept closer to the window, keeping low so I wouldn't be seen. My hands were clammy as I slowly pulled the blinds aside, just a crack. I could barely see through the small gap, but I had to know. I had to see what was out there. At first, nothing. I strained my eyes into the dark, trying to make out any shape, any movement. Then, I saw it. A figure standing motionless, just beyond the reach of the dim streetlight. It was hard to make out any details, but I could tell that it was tall, unnaturally tall. The figure wasn't moving, it just stood there facing the house. I couldn't see a face, only the outline of a body, draped in shadows. But I could feel it. It felt like the figure was looking directly at me, even though I was hidden in the darkness of my room. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled back from the window, trying to steady my shaking hands. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. There was no way this was normal. Whoever or whatever this was, they were watching me. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I told myself I was just imagining things. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was just exhausted. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. It didn't matter what I told myself. This wasn't something I could explain away. I tried to calm down and think clearly. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police if needed, but something stopped me. I don't know why. Maybe it was fear, or maybe I was too terrified to make a sound. Instead, I just sat there, frozen in place, staring at the door. Minutes passed, what felt like hours. The figure outside remained motionless. I tried to steady my breath, but I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The silence was suffocating. Then, without warning, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A faint tap on the glass. The window. I froze. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. Slowly, cautiously, I turned back toward the window. There, on the glass, were faint, almost imperceptible handprints. Smudges, as though someone had pressed their palms against the window. My heart stopped. I couldn't see the figure anymore, but I didn't need to. The handprints were there, they were real. I backed away, terrified, and stumbled to the door, unlocking it and stepping into the hallway. The house felt suffocating now, too small. I went downstairs and checked the windows, the doors, but nothing was there. Nothing had changed. Yet I felt like I was being hunted, like someone was right behind me, watching my every move. The next few days were a blur. I tried to go about my life as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every night, I still woke up at 2:43 a.m. Every night, I heard the scraping sound, but when I checked the window, there was nothing. No figure, no handprints. It was as if the events of the night before had never happened. But I knew they had. The final straw came one evening when I was out running errands. I came home and noticed something different. The lights in the house were on. I lived alone, and I never left the lights on when I left. My stomach turned as I stepped inside, cautious of every creak the house made beneath my feet. I moved quietly through the house, checking the rooms. The lights were on in the living room, the hallway, and my bedroom, but everything seemed normal. I stepped into the bedroom last. My eyes went to the window, half expecting to see the figure there, but I saw nothing. There were no handprints. The blinds were closed. And I looked down at my bed, and I froze. The pillows were like ice, and they were floating up, and the pillows were... On the pillow, there was a note. It was handwritten, the ink smeared as though the writer had been shaking as they wrote. "I'm closer than you think." I felt my blood run cold. I turned around quickly, but there was no one. There was no one there. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just being watched, I was being followed.